Thank you for joining us. This is part 3 of our video tutorial series on using Flutter on the Windows desktop. Today we're going to focus on the notifiers section of our application. The previous 2 videos are published on a playlist. The link to the playlist as well as the completed code on GitHub are in the description. Our learning objective today is to learn how to use state management in Flutter. We will use the provider package. State management is how to control the different interactions between, for example, the button press on the top of the screen with some type of status update on the bottom of the screen. These screens and windows can be anywhere in your application on different screens or different parts of the app. State management is the process of connecting it all together so that you can manage what the current state of a window is, such as if it's spinning or if there's text here that's showing the state of the download process. The previous video explained the layout of the application and how to make a scrollable window on the bottom portion of your screen. Our objective today is to create a GUI portion on the top that has at least one button. When you press the button, you'll have interactivity and will change the contents on the bottom portion of the screen. Wrap the text widget within a center widget in order to move it down and place it in the center of the top portion of the screen. After we have the layout of the text widget set up in the center, then change the text widget into a text button. We're going to use the text button as the main way to give interactivity to our application. The text button widget has 2 arguments that we're going to use, onPressed and child. The child is the piece of text that appears inside of the text button. onPressed is the callback function that is going to be run when you actually press the button. Our objective will be to get the images from the internet, so change the label of the button to get images. And within the callback function, just print some type of message to make sure that when we press the button, it's hooked up and it's actually running something. As a quick test, just print out getting images. The messages should appear in the debug console portion of VS Code. Once you've tested the button and make sure that when you press on it, it works, and you have a test message in the debug console, start working on the notifiers. The notifier is what we're going to use to send a message from the button to the bottom portion of the screen. The outcome will be the same as using set state, which you may be familiar with, but this is a more scalable way to manage the state of your application. In the notifiers folder, in the new file, response_notifier.dart, create a new class called response notifier. This class extends the change notifier, which is from Flutter. The change notifier is actually not part of the provider package. The provider package, which we added into our application in the previous video steps, actually it just makes the change notifier easier to use. The response notifier class that we just created is simply a set of getters and setters for the private variable that we're going to use to hold the contents of the response window. Because we might want some graphics in the response window, we're going to make the response window variable a widget. Initially, for testing purposes, we'll have it be a text widget, but we could make it a progress indicator in the future. Placing an underscore before as the first character of the variable names makes it a private variable. And we'll first test it with just some type of status message here to indicate when we call it up that it's a status window. Because it's a private variable, we can't access it from outside of the response notifier class. So to make the private variable publicly available, we're going to use a getter. The getter is only used to read the variable from this class. In Dart, there is a special keyword get that you can put in front of the getter to make it clear that it is actually a getter, and it will return the private variable. So there's going to be a public method called response widget, and that will return the private variable underscore response widget. To change the private variable, we're going to use a setter, and this is just another public method that accepts the data that you want to set to the private variable. I think by convention, Dart They often use update response widget instead of set response widget. So I think I'll make that change and just call it update response widget. And the contents of this will be, so the key thing is you need to set the private variable within this method. So it's going to receive the data from some outside class, and it's going to receive a response widget. By convention, we're just calling it the same. So from within this method, you can access the private variable underscore response widget, and then you just assign it to the thing that you received when you called up this thing. The key part of this is to notify the listener. That last line in the setter is the key thing, the notify listeners. This completes the change notifier that we've called response notifier. In main.dart, we're going to wrap our main stateless widget called my app. We're going to wrap a provider around it. So you need to make sure that you've imported the provider package. Line 3, that provider package is an external package. The thing needs to be in your pubspec.yaml file. You also need to import the file that you just created, the response notifier. So import that file. You can access the response notifier class. And this is the thing that you just created. It's the change notifier. With provider and the change notifier, we'll be able to control the state of our application. This simple example only has one change notifier. You can put multiple change notifiers here. The top of the tree widget is my app, and under that we have the rest of our application. So we're going to wrap the provider around this, the change notifier provider. By doing this, we can set up listeners anywhere in the widget tree. So after the create argument, we're going to pass it back the class that we just created, which is the response notifier. Again, the response notifier is a change notifier. This is how the changes from the button press get passed down through the widget tree. The top of the tree widget, the my app, becomes a child. And so that's how it's passed down all the way down the tree. With this technique, we can set up individual widgets anywhere in the tree to watch for changes to a certain variable. Now that we've hooked up the change notifier to the top widget tree, we can now set a watcher on the bottom portion of the screen. Let's recap what we're trying to accomplish here. We want to press the button and change the state of the widget that is on the bottom portion of the screen. This is our response window here. So it's a fairly simple action. However, we're using provider in order to make it more scalable in case that if the application gets more complex, you want a better way to manage the state of the application rather than set state. But our goal is pretty simple. Press the button and the bottom window updates. There are 3 concepts that we need to learn for state management. The first concept is that there is a change notifier. There is a class that is helping you to manage the changes to different parts of your application. We called our change notifier response notifier. So it just extends the Flutter class change notifier, and that's where we have our variables, we have our setters, and we have our getters. So it just holds the variable that we want to change, and it handles the notification of when the variable changes. Then the second piece is this listener. So we have a listener and we attach it to a widget. We're going to attach this listener to the bottom portion of the screen, which is our response window. And so when the variable in the first step changes, we then redraw the bottom window. The third concept is that there is some type of notification that is sent out to the listeners. So when you change the variable, and this method is also in the response notifier, so when you change the variable, you notify the listeners. We're going to attach this method to the top button of the screen. You press the button, it changes the variable, and it notifies the listeners. And then we're set. So we want to attach a listener or some way to watch for changes to the bottom portion of our screen. That is currently on our home screen. So let's import the provider package and the change notifier that we just created, which is called response notifier. So import those two pieces first, and then let's work on attaching the listener to the response window. So the notifiers we did place in this subfolder called notifiers. And right now there's only one. There could be many of these notifiers. But in this example, to keep it simple, there's just this one response notifier. And then if you recall, the variable that we're passing around is actually a widget. So that widget can be a graphic, or it could be a text widget. It could be anything on the Flutter screen. We're going to have to use a context in order to talk to the change notifier. And with provider, the context now has this special keyword called watch. You use these angle brackets after watch, and you put the name of the change notifier, which we called response notifier. So it's the actual name of the class that you extended from change notifier. And after that, there are these round brackets, so the round parentheses, and then you have the name of the getter or the variable. With this setup, the bottom portion of the window is now watching for any changes to that variable response widget. So the final step is simply to update the variable and then notify the listeners when you press the button. So we'll go to the portion that we have the button, and within the curly brackets, that's the code that's going to be executed when the button is pressed. So if you recall, in the change notifier that we called response notifier, we created a setter to update the variable and notify the listeners. So the way to access that setter is context.read angle brackets, and then it's the name of the specific change notifier that we created, which is response notifier, round parentheses, dot, and it's the name of the method that we created. So we created this update response widget. And within there, I'm going to pass it this pre-built Flutter widget called circular progress indicator. Fantastic. We are now managing state in our application. Congratulations. You've just covered the most difficult portion of this tutorial lesson, which is state management with notifiers. We're done. We've already completed most of the GUI here. We'll have to reorganize it and change some bits of it, but we have the button working. We have the button window, the top portion of the screen, and the home screen. We next need to work on the local storage and the network. This is a Windows desktop application, so we're going to need to find the directory of the pictures on the Windows, depending on who's logged into the Windows system. We're going to cover all of this in future videos. So I suggest you subscribe to the channel so you can get notified when we update the tutorial series. If you like the series, give this a like, and we'll use that feedback to decide what to produce in the future. Have a great day, and congratulations once again on powering through learning about state management with provider in Flutter.